Hello, and welcome to Game Design Hour, the podcast where I interview the people who create the video games you know and love. I'm your host, Miles Goldsmith, and on today's episode, I'm interviewing one of the people behind the video game Sweet Surrender. Sweet Surrender is a VR roguelike shooter game where you battle your way through different encounters with evil robots. Let's meet our guest and get into the interview.
So my name is Yacine Salmi, and I'm the founder of Salmi Games. I guess my job title is studio director. I kind of wear many hats at the studio. I fill in the gaps. I help people solve their problems so that they can make great games.
So, what was the first thing that really sparked your interest in creating video games?
Yeah, I think it was Super Mario World. It's an old game now from early 90s. That was the first time it's not the first game I fell in love with, but it was the first time where I started to wonder, okay, somebody out there made this game and it must be possible to make games like this. I don't quite understand it. Like, I didn't understand the concept of software at the time. It was just like it came in a cartridge. But that was the first time I started thinking about making games. Super Mario World is such a masterpiece. That's how I got curious, basically, about making games. Yeah.
How did the idea for Sweet Surrender originate?
Yeah, it's a bit of a winding road, let's say. Sweet Surrender is our third VR game, and our previous games were sort of playful, violent, but not necessarily shooter type games. We were trying to create more fun family experiences. Even though we tried to avoid making shooters, like I didn't want to make a shooter. It was kind of fun. Like one of our prototypes was just messing about, and we thought that roguelike shooters had not really been explored. So we took that and started exploring it. And we first approached it as a shooter with lots of physics, like fun physics with a roguelike element. And that seemed to interest people. And we just kept iterating on that until the core became fun. So it kind of came out of nowhere. Where did good ideas come from? It came out as well of a desire to try to make something that could be successful in VR. So our previous two VR games were fun, but like they were very niche. They didn't really hook a wider audience. And VR shooters, they're quite plentiful, but like there's a big section or big segment of the VR market that likes shooters. And so even though there are a lot of shooter games out there, it felt like that actually was validating that there was a market for such a game. So we felt like we could carve out a niche there.
What were some of the biggest inspirations behind Sweet Surrender?
For me personally, the biggest inspiration was Spelunky. I love that game. I think it's a brilliant game. It's the roguelike platformer. We tried to make a Spelunky-like or Spelunky-esque like shooter. That game it's a lot of fun. It's very carefully balanced. There's a lot of thought put into all the different systems, and the systems just work and build on each other very well. That was a huge inspiration for Sweet Surrender. I would have loved if we could have made more of our world dynamic, like that you could blow up more walls and carve your own path through the levels. But that was challenging on mobile VR, and also it's quite a challenging thing to do in a 3D game versus a 2D game. And Spelunky is probably the biggest inspiration.
After coming up with the idea for Sweet Surrender, what were some of the first few steps that you took towards creating the game?
We took sort of two parallel steps. We put together a prototype, and at the same time, we were starting to put a pitch deck together. So we were trying to secure funding for the game, and these two things sort of evolved in parallel. So the pitch had to be interesting. Like just putting words on a document is not enough, and visuals, concept art is also not enough. For us, it's important to prove the concept as well. So we prototyped some small scenes. We try to also prototype a visual art. Like we really wanted to go for a distinct look that would stand out, that would look good on a constrained platform like the Quest. And we messed about as well with trying to create some fun physics-oriented scenarios. We put a lot of GIFs into this pitch deck, and they were all based on a prototype. And one of our coolest GIF was being one floor above some robots, having a crate in front of you, sticking a sticky grenade on it, and then pushing the crate over with your gun, and it just like blows up on the robots. That showed off several different aspects. Like you had the gun, but you weren't shooting, and it was lots of physics involved, and it was sort of like not exactly puzzle solving, but sort of using the different elements together. So a lot of prototyping and iteration, just figuring out what's fun and taking the best parts and iterating on those.
Many games have interesting ideas that were cut for one reason or another. What were some interesting ideas that you thought about for the game but just ended up cutting?
Co-op multiplayer, that's something we cut super early in the game. We knew it would be fun to make, but we just didn't have the budget. It just increased the complexity way too much, and we had to make sort of a hard choice at that point. We've cut out a lot of like content, like we originally wanted. We're not done with the game. We're still updating it, but we wanted a whole fifth world. One of the cool things of Spelunky is this concept of the secret chain, which is like there's the main game and then the main run through, and then there's a whole set or sequence of secrets, and they sort of all tie together. And if you do this chain of secrets, you get to an extra fifth world and to the real ending or whatever. That's the sort of second layer of challenge you have after you beat the vanilla game or the base game. And this is something that we've started working on, but we've never finished. So there's a few secrets in the game, but the whole chain of secrets doesn't exist, and it's still on a drawing board somewhere. A lot of weapon ideas didn't make it in. So you got your gloves where you can equip chips, and we wanted to also be able to pick up gloves that had like maybe a different number of slots or a permanent slot that you couldn't switch out, or just different elements like that. A lot of little tools and gadgets haven't made it into the game. A lot of things we didn't get into the original game, though, we have added over time with various updates.
Throughout the game, the players go through 4 distinct locations. Are you able to tell me a bit about your process for creating and designing the look and feel of those 4 locations?
Like everything we do, we approach it iteratively. So it started with trying to figure out what is this world you're inhabiting, trying to give it a backstory, trying to think of the progression of the player as they go through the game. We knew we wanted to go up some tower, usually going up a tower, down a tower, across the world, right? And we try to flesh out the backstory of this environment. And by doing that and thinking about how could we have distinct environments, we started building up what type of environments could exist in such a tower. So mines or heat or just a lot of ideas were thrown onto the table. And then you start to like, okay, filter them down, which ones are too alike or which ones could have unique elements to them. And you just go through this process. And at the same time, our lead artists at the time, we worked with them to sort of come up with different mood boards. How would this area feel? Like what kind of colors? And that feeds into that whole process, and you iterate together on these things. There's no magical process, I guess. There must exist more formal ways of approaching this, but it's sort of brainstorm, filter down, review, iterate.
How long did you and the team spend working on the game?
I think we started 3 years ago, and we launched about 15 months ago. So we worked on a game for about 20 months. Let's say 18 months, 19 months from the first concept to releasing. And then we've continued to update the game for the last 14 months. So almost 3 years altogether.
Sweet Surrender is a roguelike game, meaning that when you die, you restart pretty much the entire game. What drew you to the genre of roguelike?
It would be Spelunky. Again, Spelunky was sort of my entry point into the roguelike world, and started playing other roguelike, like Slay the Spire and Dream Quest. I don't know if you've played that. It's like a sort of an unpolished iOS game. It might be on Steam as well. Again, just don't want to harp on it too much, but like Spelunky is a very elegant roguelike game. And that's sort of, you can take a reduced amount of assets and create a compelling experience that draws players in again and again and again. It was very appealing. It makes you think, okay, it's simple, or I don't need this much content. I could just produce some assets and then just magically generate things out. It's not simple. It's a lot of work in a different way. But this idea of your choices that you're making have a big impact on what happens to you, like one wrong choice can be the end of your run, was very appealing to me. It also kind of fit as well into the type of experience you want to offer in VR, which is you don't want players to play more than like 40 minutes, like a VR session. Of course, some people play longer, or 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, but like 20 to 40 minutes is a nice session. And a run of Sweet Surrender can take 5 minutes or can take half an hour. Like a successful run would probably take 30 to 40 minutes. So that kind of fit nicely into that formula. we didn't need to make a 3-hour long game, at least for a single run. It attracted us for multiple reasons, just kind of fit better with the market we were trying to target.
There's a bunch of different interesting weapons in Sweet Surrender. Were there any weapons or weapon types that you were thinking about adding into the game, but just really never ended up getting in?
Yeah, I think we have like several documents full of weapon ideas. I think off the top of my head, energy guns is something that we wanted to play around with, and like energy ammo and the whole concept that didn't really get in. We stayed away from any type of archery weapon, like where you have to load up and aim. Just it was something we wanted to explore, but it's a different mechanic and it didn't feel core enough to the game to include it. Melee weapons is something that we didn't have much up until this last update. So we had a wrench from day one, but we never really focused on the melee side. You can always hit enemies with your guns, but we just kind of ignored it. Again, because it didn't feel like a core part, but it was one of the most requested features from the community. So we finally spent some time adding those.
Staying organized and managing your scope is a really important part of creating video games. How did you work to manage your scope and stay organized while you were working on Sweet Surrender?
I was lucky that I have a partner who's very pragmatic and very good at sort of reeling me in. So I kind of like, oh, we should implement everything. So it's good to have somebody who is focused on a schedule. What we tried to do is be realistic about the amount of time we had left at any given time, and trying to just continuously update our backlog. Like keep in mind, like the high level features we still had to implement, the major content areas, try like as early as possible to flesh out the things we had to do, like just to be aware of it and honest about it, like not just, oh yeah, we got to implement audio, oh, that's probably a week's work at the end we can do, but no, like take some time to think it through, take some time to think of the dependencies and the things that impact each other. Like you need a new enemy, it's not just modeling it and you got to implement the AI, and you think you could implement the AI in parallel to modeling it, but there's a bit of a feedback loop and dependency there, and then you got to test it and polish it, and certain things take longer than you expect. Like so planning for buffer, being open and honest about what you still need to do and how much time you have left, and continuously revisiting that. One of the good things we did in this project was to make cuts early. When we were like, okay, this is not going to happen. Okay, just move it. We're going to do it in DLC or an update. Just take it off the table now. And
what was your process for designing and creating the different enemies of the game? Were there any interesting enemies that didn't make it into the final game?
I mean, again, it was iterative, but we know we wanted non-humans basically for just to reduce to make it less violent. Like I don't like the idea of shooting another human. Okay, so you're shooting robots, whatever, they're bad robots. Okay. So we focused on trying first the most obvious types of enemies. Bad guys that shoot at you, bad guys that come close to you and do melee damage, bad guys that try to snipe you off, bad guys that explode. And then we try to mix and match and create variations and think about where we had gaps. One thing that really helped is we consulted with a friend of a friend. His name is Martin Nurkar, and he did a bit of consulting for us and really helped us brainstorm ideas, but also bring it into structure. So he came up, and we already had a few enemies, but he came up with a lot of different variations and then sort of helped group things together and explain, okay, you want to create fun combination of enemies. So helped us pull it together in a procedural part of the game. So you don't want to just generate a random, like 4 random types of enemies, but maybe you want 3 melee guys together, and this is a melee oriented level. And so you also maybe generate some stuff that supports melee combat, or you combine things together. So a couple melees and a sniper, and so the melee guys are distracting you from the sniper, and you got to like watch out, take cover, and all these things. That was super useful. That was an area where we were not very strong, and Martin really helped us refine the concept, bring some structure into it. So yeah, hiring a consultant was very, very useful.
How did you go about doing playtesting for Sweet Surrender, and what important pieces of information did you learn from playtesting?
I think playtesting is super important for games, and for VR, it's even more important. You have to deal, aside from the whole gameplay issues, you have to deal with comfort, and different people in VR have different expectations or different desires, let's say, or preferences. And I think making sure people don't feel sick right off the bat is super important. So we would play test with different friends. We try to always take somebody fresh who had never experienced the game, because it's usually when you get the most raw feedback, I find, with the least bias. So this was pandemic time, which made things even harder. We tried to get one or two people every few months and just give them a build and see how they react. We also play tested internally quite a bit. It was always helpful to you get feedback. Is its tutorial clear? Is the onboarding clear? Do you understand what you need to do? You get to catch often people playing a way that you didn't expect with different approaches. This was always eye-opening. We try to never guide the player. Usually just give them the headset, answer their questions if they have questions, but let them figure it out and just observe what they're doing. And then afterwards, try to ask them some follow-up questions. Oh, why did you get stuck here? Or, oh, you did that. Well, why? But try not to lead them too much and just listen to what they have to say. Like, listen to the type of problems they ran into. And I usually ignore any potential solutions that they offer, not out of arrogance or anything like that, but it's sort of, that person is usually thinking just from their point of view, and you have other considerations. So it's, why does this person get stuck here? Or how come they just walked by that grenade? Or why do they activate grenades and let it explode in their hands? Which is something that we never did internally, but a lot of people did the first time they pick up a grenade. I think playtests are super, incredibly useful, and that's how we tend to approach them, with fresh people whenever possible.
Which parts of the game did you have to put the most time and effort into to get just the way you wanted it?
That would be either the visuals or the gameplay balancing. The visuals was, we went for a specific art style with this sort of outline shader technique, which looks cool, I think. Allows us to be relatively low poly and run at good frame rate on this sort of constrained hardware, but still have this unique look. It took a few iterations to get the algorithm and the tools right. So we had a pipeline of tools so that you could define outlines and inlines and all these things. That took quite a bit of work to get it looking right. Gameplay balancing, I think, is maybe obvious, especially with a roguelike where you have a lot of RNG. It's really hard to balance things, make it challenging yet approachable, have a good curve, punish the player when they do silly things, but don't punish them too hard so that they don't want to play, and make sure that they understand why they're getting hit and who they're getting hit from. So balancing the gameplay, but also making sure the UX is super clear, the feedback you get is super clear. We spent a lot of time on that, making it harder and then making it easier, and then trying to balance it and making sure it's varied enough, that you don't feel like you're playing the same level again.
Did you add any Easter eggs into the game? If so, have you seen many players find them?
There's a couple Easter eggs. There's a plant you can find that works as a shield, or you can unlock it in your home base and you can carry it in a run. When you transition up to the next level, you ride an elevator, and every once in a while you get elevator music when you're riding the elevator. So we have a couple little silly things like that, and we have seen them on streams that people have found them. So nothing super crazy, just little nods here and there.
Can fans of the game expect more updates in the future?
I don't know. I think so. The game's quite polished right now, so our community is still requesting certain things, and there's still areas we want to flesh out and improve. So yeah, we plan on continuing to update the game and adding new things for players.
What was the biggest challenge that you faced while working on Sweet Surrender?
I don't know if it's the biggest challenge, but it was one of the most frustrating challenges. Is we launched with a day one bug that QA didn't catch, that we didn't catch, which broke the experience for a lot of players. It was a bug that didn't crash the game. It just broke things in a way that the game was still playable. It was just extremely broken, which is one of the worst bugs. Because if it just crashes and somebody can just tell you, oh, it crashes, and then you can usually reproduce it. But it took us 3 days to find and fix the bug right after launch, and that was quite challenging. And that bug was in a tutorial, when you pick up a grenade, if you let the grenade explode, then the object disappears, it becomes a null pointer, and it causes some dereferencing issues, and it kind of just breaks the movement, but not fully. When you're biased or when you've been testing a certain way, you know this thing's a grenade, you're never going to hold it in your hand. So even though we tested our tutorial dozens and hundreds of times, that particular bug we never tested. That was frustrating and challenging to hunt down. We were quite relieved when we did find the cause of that issue.
Looking back now, is there anything that you wish you could have done differently before you launched the game?
Man, these are tough questions. I gotta do some deep thinking here. I think there's a few avenues that we took that were ended up being dead ends. And I'm sorry, I can't actually think of a concrete example, but I think it would have been nice to avoid wasting time on certain things, because then you could have accomplished other things. But it's difficult to know ahead of time what is going to work, what is not going to work. I wish as well that I had managed to secure more funding and gone for a more ambitious, like cooperative experience, because I think that might have caused more of a stir in the market, let's say. But I don't know, maybe that sort of caused us to release an even smaller game. So I think fundamentally there's not much that I regret about how we did this. I think we launched the game on time, on budget, and the core was fun. So I'm glad we got there and didn't mess it up.
What was the biggest lesson that you learned from working on the game?
Reduce scope as early as possible. Like it's so easy to be overly ambitious, and then the scope of the game we originally wanted to make was 2 to 3 times bigger. Originally wanted like 25 levels or something, and like dozens more variations, and knowing how to cut things out early enough, and knowing that when something's going to be out of scope, and ripping it out instead of like spending too much time worrying about it. I think it's a good skill to have. It's something I struggle with. It was quite a good learning experience. From what I've observed, like the market there's quite a few different types of sub-markets in VR, but the most popular games tend to be very arcadey. They have like a very focused core loop and not necessarily tons of depth. Okay, there's Half-Life 3 or Half-Life Alyx and Saints and Sinners, but like Beat Sabers, Pistol Whip, Until You Fall, it's super focused, and they're not these huge expansive games. And I think we tried to do too much with Sweet Surrender. I'm super proud of what we accomplished, but like trying to go for even more stripped down, fun core experience seems to be the way to go if you want to be successful in the market. And I want to be successful in the market because I want to keep making games. I want our studios to keep making games. It's something that I'm trying to pay attention to a lot more, and it's tricky because our next project is probably more ambitious than Sweet Surrender. So we're already kind of in this trap. It's like, okay, this whole world we could accomplish, but let's strip it down and really focus on the core and get that right first, and then see what we could add to it or how we could grow that.
What would be your biggest piece of advice to a newer game dev trying to go and complete their first game?
Get it done, strip it down. Like, just get your first game out. Your first game, it won't be a masterpiece and it's not going to sell millions. This earlier, you can get that out of your system. Like, launch your first game, get it done. Then you can start on the next game and take your learnings and apply that and iterate. Like the faster you can iterate, the more successful you're going to be over the long term. The quicker you're going to learn, the quicker you're going to improve as a designer, as a game developer. Don't overthink things. Don't over-engineer things. Don't try to make the perfect game. Make a game and get it out. And if you are stuck making this overly ambitious game, take a 1-week break and make a 1-week game and just get it done, like start to finish, super restrained scope. Like, that's something I knew I had read from other people when I was getting started, and I still ignored, and to my own detriment, wasted a lot of time trying to make a perfect indie game. Like, just you're getting started, focus on shipping things, on getting things done, on whether it's a full game or subsystem or whatever you want to. Just start with an idea, try to execute it, put it aside, learn what you got to learn from it, and then do it again, or do a different game, or do a different adaptation of that game. That's my biggest advice, because this stuff compounds. Like, getting stuck making the perfect game for 10 years is a big waste of time.
What's next for you? What are you working on now?
We're continuing to work on Sweet Surrender. We have some few updates planned for next year. As I mentioned, we have a new game that we're starting to noodle with, prototype. We're going to build on what we learned from Sweet Surrender. I think if you paid attention to what we've been doing the past year and what our community wants, you can kind of guess where we're going. And we have a couple other smaller side projects that we're working on in VR, which unfortunately we can't talk about just yet. But we're very excited about that. So we kind of have 4 projects going on the go, if you count Sweet Surrender, and we're stretched a little bit thin, but it fulfills one of my ambitions, which is not having all our eggs in one basket. Trying to build a long-term sustainable studio, and that means diversifying our risks, trying to have more than one project on the go. There are trade-offs and overheads that come with that, but it's how I feel like I can reduce risk for our team.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great interviewing you.
Okay, thank you.
And that's how the interview went down. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to follow, like, or share. Also, if you think a friend might like it, make sure to send it to them. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.